Our next guest has written several books about the life of Mississippi native and Memphis resident Elvis Presley. Her third and final book in the Destined series is called Destined to Give, the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley. And to learn more, we are joined by author Sally A. Hoedel. Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, okay, first of all, what inspired you to write a series of books about Elvis?
Well, I always say my childhood had a soundtrack. My dad played records all the time, a lot of Sinatra, a lot of Elvis. So I grew up with good music and was always a fan from the time I was a kid. Grew up reading all of the books. And then as a journalist myself, I really wanted to kind of delve in and write about something I was passionate about. And the Destined series grew out of that.
Wow. Okay, so this is your third and final book. How did you know that this new book should happen? And how do you know this is the final one?
Well, the first book, Destined to Die Young, is all about Elvis's health issues. So it follows that thread of his health issues, throughout his entire life. And this book follows the generosity thread and how his generosity evolves. And I see those two as bookends to the series, really, because I believe that Elvis's life was one of survival and not self-destruction, as it's often talked about. He survived through extreme poverty, then extreme fame, and then a lot of these health issues, 5 of which were genetic in nature and out of his control. So he was finding a way to continue being Elvis Presley. So if the first book covers that health struggle, then this one really does address the poverty and the fame, which, were two major components of his generous nature.
Okay, well, I am going to say that you might have more books out there because there are more than 1 million artifacts that have not been put out yet that are still in the archives. So, I don't know,
Wow.
Just something to think about. Okay, so we're...
Never know.
Right. So now let's talk about the generous nature of Elvis. What did you uncover and dig up?
Well, I think the most important thing for everyone to recognize is that his generosity was a learned behavior when he was on the receiving end of it in Tupelo. And it wasn't just, people helping each other, and that was certainly what happened on those city blocks, but it was a generosity that was rooted in survival. If they didn't help each other, they weren't going to survive. And it was such a level of poverty and struggle that, that was necessary. And also Elvis constantly witnessed and was on the receiving end of people who had just as little as he did, or even less, helping others. So that lesson really stayed with him. He had an uncle there who was a leader in the community, and I think that inspired him to be the leader in his family eventually.
And one of the things you pointed out is feeling responsible for friends and family. Can you delve deeper into that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's so much testimony out there from his cousins that he decided at a very early age, preteen, teen, that he was going to take on that responsibility. He wanted to find a way to pull them out of poverty and then keep them there. And there's a really, a very important moment in his life when he's with Gladys, his mother, and they're being interviewed by government housing to live in Lauderdale courts there in Memphis. And I think that was a pivotal moment for him where he decided if anyone's going to turn the tide here, it's going to be me. And he talked about it and he wanted to do that. And, he talked about doing that as an electrician, right? Which would have just given them another level of stability. But it ended up, he became the most famous person on the planet, but he didn't set out to be one of the most well-known recording artists. He first set out to be a provider and to pull his family out of poverty. And then it became his extended family and his friends. And then he had the great responsibility of keeping them all there.
Anything interesting or surprising that came up that you never expected?
When you first start to delve into this, it feels like it'll be a feel-good book, and it is a feel-good book. But fame taints everything over time, and again, my job is to restore Elvis's humanity, so we have to look at the good and the bad and the positive and negative of everything. And even in his generosity, there is some negative, and that was a surprise to me. I wanted to anchor the book in some of the bigger acts of generosity, but a lot of times they were publicity stunts dictated by the Colonel. And I think where you really find his humanity and the why of what he's doing when he gives so much away is when he's helping strangers and when he gives cars away. And so many of those great stories happened right there in Memphis. He remembered what it was like to look at those cars and not being able to afford them. So he knew he had everything. He remembered what it was like to have nothing, and he wanted to give back.
Okay, tell us how to get our hands on the book, what you want readers to take away, and why do you think everyone cares so much about Elvis still to this day?
Well, it's a big question. I think they care so much about Elvis because of his humanity, because he he achieved so much. You know, he is the epitome of the American dream, right? But then he didn't forget his roots. He remembered, again, what it was like to have nothing. And Danny Thomas there from Memphis, you know, was very structured and organized in his calling with the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Elvis wasn't quite as structured and organized with his calling, but his calling was to help people, to make them happy through his music, to entertain, and then to help them and just give them a little bit of, you know, whatever that was. And if he was giving away a ring or a car, he knew what that meant to
All right,
people.
Sally, we know that folks can get your book on all digital platforms. We really appreciate your time so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.